Welcome to this episode of the Conscious Business Coffee Break, where we take a few moments to explore what's happening in the conscious business movement, expand awareness, and encourage your efforts in conscious business. Greetings, everyone. I'm Stephen Donaco of the Conscious Business Enterprise, a division of Humanities team. And on today's program, we're talking about evolutionary forms of capital. And the program today inspired by a piece I came across in the World Economic Forum website. Headline is Goodbye GDP, Hello Six-Part Balance Sheet. And I think I've probably talked about this topic before of gross domestic product and GDP as a measure. And in this article, it talks about the idea that GDP, gross domestic product, is inadequate as a measure of economic well-being. And this inadequacy actually is not all that new. It's gotten a lot more press in recent times, but it really, the whole question of GDP as being relevant fully dates back to the 1960s. And the shortcomings identified with GDP have been the failure to account for environmental externalities and the failure to count valuable non-market services such as work in the home. So, among other things. And in the past decade, we've seen this increasing call for something that's better than GDP, the need to go beyond GDP in measuring economic progress. So it's become mainstream now. And the challenge, of course, with this is reaching a consensus in the world of economics and business about what should replace GDP, because it's very well entrenched. It's been used for a long time, and it's one of those things where you say, or the world says, that, well, this is the way we've always done it, so we just got to keep doing it this way. And I'm going to explore why that's not necessarily true. But let's talk about first the limitations of current economics. And this is the economics of the past century, primarily. And the economics of the past century is its basis in utilitarian ethics. So this is the idea that people are assumed to maximize their quote-unquote utility. And utility is defined as being generated by the flow of income and expenditures in any given time period. So one point of dissonance with this idea of utility is that things like natural disasters look like they're good for the economy. These are bad things that happen that look like they're good for business, because despite the destruction caused by something like a natural disaster, there's a follow-on increase in spending. So it looks like, oh, well, there's spending going on, and it's to do good. It's to repair from an economic, or rather a natural disaster. But really, in that paradigm of economics, that spending isn't really recognizing the human suffering that's been caused by the disaster. So the suffering of that disaster, or as a result of a disaster, is of no consequence through the lens of current economics. So the World Economic Forum has proposed a different kind of approach to measuring economic progress. And this is based on an understanding of what they call social welfare. And first is to implement a measure of economic progress on the concept of capabilities versus utility. And this is based on a simple question: what do people need to allow them to lead the kind of life they want? And current economics doesn't really address that at all. It's all about just financial growth. So in this World Economic Forum proposal to base economics on capabilities instead of utility, they've identified 6 different kinds of capital. So there's, of course, financial capital, which we're all familiar with. And then there's human capital, education and skills. There's physical capital, which is infrastructure such as roads and housing. There's intangible capital, and this would be things like patents, goodwill, or data. There's natural capital, including clean air, green space, and a healthy ecosystem. And then finally, social capital, which is a well-functioning community or nation. And in the current economics in the current measures of GDP, we don't look at all of these other forms of capital, and nor does it really care about human capital, physical capital, natural capital, or social capital. And of course, because GDP is so well entrenched and it's the way we've always done things, the World Economic Forum recognizes that this shift to a different kind of measure is not an easy switch to make. And it requires a shift in conceptual thinking in the field of economics. So the shift to the concept of economic welfare is really taking economics and then layering in philosophy and ethics, which is something that the discipline has not been very good at these past 100 years or so. And if we talk about modern economics of the past 100 years being that of utility, you might be surprised to find that actually for the last 60 years, there has successfully been an alternative measure of economic well-being, including these other forms of capital in the country of Bhutan. So the government of Bhutan had followed a developmental policy inspired by a concept of gross national happiness, or GNH. And it has used this idea of GNH in public policy for the last 60 years. And then within the last year or so, it's made a commitment to use GNH as a measure in business and provide a certification process for business. So Bhutan developed a GNH, or a gross national happiness certification tool, that covers 9 domains, or what we might call 9 forms of alternative capital. And those include psychological well-being, standard of living, good governance, health, education, community vitality, cultural diversity and resilience, time use, and ecological diversity and resilience. So going a few beyond the World Economic Forum's alternative measures or other forms of capital from 6, but including 9. So my commentary on all this is that what we're really talking about here in moving beyond GDP is the innovation of economics. And really, it's time in the world for economics to evolve, to become better. And economics, in its current sense, is no doubt competent at analyzing financial capital. But now it's time to take that competency, so we're not going to throw it away, we're going to include it. We're going to include economics' current competency for measuring financial capital, and then we're going to transcend that with including these other forms of capital. So take that previous knowledge and that skill, include it, and then we transcend the practice of economics, the discipline of economics, by including these other forms of capital. So it's the innovation of economics. And in innovation, think about it for a moment. The cell phone that you use, or the car that you drive, or the appliances that you have in your home, you think about the companies that make those things, and you never expect those companies to stop innovating, right? So that cell phone that you have in your hand, the one that you currently have, you don't expect it to be the end-all and be-all of cell phones. The company that makes that phone, you expect to continue to innovate. And we need to have that same expectation for something like economics. We can't expect it just to sit still and believe that it's good enough for all time. So just as now is the time for conscious business, now is the time for conscious economics. And like with any paradigm shift, there is resistance. And these resistances can come out of fear. The resistance can come from the myopic attitude that, this is the way we've always done it. But now it's time to embrace what's new, what's better, and what's evolutionary. So looking at this through the lens of the Conscious Business Declaration, we really are looking at 2 principles. Principle 2, the purpose of business is to increase economic prosperity while contributing to a healthy environment and improving human well-being. And those latter pieces, the environment and human well-being, are other forms of capital. So it's baked right there into the Conscious Business Declaration. And then principle 4, business must operate with economic, social, and ecological transparency. And financial capital is only one narrow view of that entire picture. So happy to give you something to think about there, and it's hopeful that we see a country like Bhutan really being proactive about adopting something evolutionary and innovative, and let's continue to hold out that that will expand, that consciousness will expand across the world, so that we are really paying attention to all of the things that we need as a humanity to not only sustain, but to flourish and flourish fully. So there you have it on the Conscious Business Coffee Break. We'll see you again next week on Wednesday at 9 a.m. U.S. Central Time for another edition. And in the meantime, have a great weekend, everyone. Talk to you soon.